Hello and welcome to quiz class. I'm your host Ellen, and today we have 100 questions on general knowledge. Let's take a look at our quiz class awards. Let us know how you rank in the comments at the end, along with the answer to the bonus question. And let's begin. Which motion picture was the first to contain dialogue? Steamboat Willie, Metropolis, or The Jazz Singer? The Jazz Singer. Which cheese is illegal in many countries because it contains live maggots? Gorgonzola, Pecorino Romano, or Casu Marzu? Casu Marzu. Which country banned Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in 1931 because of the talking animals? Singapore, China, or Korea? China. In what year did the Rwandan genocide occur? 1998, 1994, or 1996? 1994. What 20th century diet trend involved eating cotton balls soaked in juice? The juice ball diet, cotton ball cleanse, or cotton ball diet? Cotton ball diet. Which country declared war on birds in the 1930s? Australia, Canada, or the United States? Australia. What luxury fashion brand became known for its quilted handbags in the 1950s? Givenchy, Chanel, or Dior? Chanel. What was a Depression sandwich in 1930s America? Chicago dog, Detroit slider, or the Philly pickle? Chicago dog. Which household brand introduced the cleaning product Spick and Span in 1933? Johnson & Johnson, P&G, or Lysol? P&G. What color did some women avoid wearing in the 1930s due to superstition? This was in Britain. Black, pink, or green? Green. In what year did the first regularly scheduled television service begin in the UK? 1936, 1949, or 1928? 1936. Which Australian Prime Minister suddenly disappeared while swimming and was never found? John Gorton, Bob Menzies, or Harold Holt? Harold Holt. What policies did the U.S. adopt in the 1930s to stay out of conflicts? Neutrality Act, Non-Aggression Act, or the Peacekeeping Act? Neutrality Act. Which European treaty created the common market? The Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Rome, or Treaty of Brussels? Treaty of Rome. Which herbicide was most widely used during the Vietnam War? Agent Purple, Agent Orange, or Agent White? Agent Orange. Which country was the first to offer commercial hovercraft service? USSR, Germany, or the United Kingdom? The United Kingdom. Which band's drummer was nicknamed the Human Metronome? Led Zeppelin, The Who, or Devo? Devo. Who made the first soccer-style field goal in American football? Jim Thorpe, Tom Dempsey, or Pete Gogolak? That's field goal. Pete Gogolak. Which disease led to the iron lung invention? Tuberculosis, polio, or asthma? Polio. Which Edward Hopper painting depicts the urban atmosphere during World War II? Automat, Gas, or Nighthawks? Nighthawks. Which U.S. figure was photographed in a military uniform with a corncob pipe during World War II? Dwight Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, or George Patton? Douglas MacArthur. Which 20th century Mexican painter is known for dramatic self-portraits? Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, or Leonora Carrington? Frida Kahlo. Who was the first Indigenous Australian author to publish his writings in English? Jack Davis, David Unipawn, or Udgeru Nunakal? David Unipawn. Which British pop artists used comic strip imagery and Ben-Day dots in the 1960s? David Hockney, Roy Lichtenstein, or Richard Hamilton? Roy Lichtenstein. Which company, along with Pioneer and MCA, introduced the first consumer Laserdisc player? Philips, RCA, or Sony? Philips. Which brand was the first to sell mascara with a wand and tube in the US during the 1950s? Helena Rubinstein, Revlon, or Max Factor? Helena Rubinstein. Which canned meat is commonly known as bully beef? Corned beef, beef ravioli, or beef loaf? Corned beef. Which Australian architect designed the Sydney Meyer Music Bowl? Yunkin Freeman, Barry Patton, or Robin Boyd? Barry Patton. What art movement was invented by the French artist Jean Dubuffet? Tachism, Nouveau Realism, or Art Brut? Art Brut. Which U.S. film was the first to receive an X rating? Easy Rider, Greetings, or The Wild Bunch? Greetings. What purpose-built capital city was designed by Oscar Niemeyer? Brasilia, Belmopan, or Canberra? Brasilia. Which 1971 album is considered one of the greatest soul records ever? Let It Be, Inner Visions, or What's Going On? What's Going On? Which 1962 act strengthened U.S. drug approval regulations? The FDA Reform Act, Drug Control Act, or Kefauver-Harris Act? Kefauver-Harris Act. What imaging device was introduced by Godfrey Hounsfield in 1971? MRI, ultrasound, or the CT scanner? The CT scanner. What was the name of the first baby in the world born via IVF? Louise Brown, Elizabeth Carr, or Inga Nielsen? Louise Brown. Which psychiatric treatment for schizophrenia involved inducing comas? Electroconvulsive therapy, Metrozole shock therapy, or insulin shock therapy? Insulin shock therapy. Which invasive animal species was introduced in Australia in 1935 to control beetle pests? Cane toad, red fox, or European carp? Cane toad. Who set the world marathon record of 2 hours, 8 minutes, 18 seconds in 1981? Alberto Salazar, Rob de Castella, or Steve Jones? Rob de Castella. Which African lake has shrunk by over 90% since the 1960s? Lake Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, or Lake Chad? Lake Chad. Who was the world's first female neurosurgeon? Florence Sabin, Diana Beck, or Sophia Ionescu? Sophia Ionescu. Japan introduced the world's first high-speed rail service. How many kilometers per hour could it travel? 210, 220, or 225 kilometers per hour? 210 kilometers per hour. Which 1967 experiment studied obedience to authority? The Ash Conformity Experiment, Stanford Experiment, or Milgram Experiment? The Milgram Experiment. La Paz is the highest capital city in the world. How high above sea level is it? 3,550 meters, 3,650 meters, or 3,725 meters? 3,650 meters. Which European island nation has no native reptiles due to its cold climate? Faroe, Iceland, or Ireland? Iceland. How much area does the Canadian Arctic tundra cover in square kilometers? 3,600,000, 1,900,000, or 2,600,000? 2,600,000. Which Japanese author wrote the 1962 book The Sound of the Mountain? Yasunari Kawabata, Yukio Mishima, or Yoko Oginome? Yasunari Kawabata. Who was the first African American to win an Olympic gold medal in an individual event? DeHart Hubbard, John Taylor, or Jesse Owens? DeHart Hubbard. Which capital city lies at the world's lowest elevation level? Amsterdam, Cairo, or Baku? Baku. Which American runner broke the 4-minute mile barrier indoors in 1962? Roger Bannister, Peter Snell, or Jim Beatty? Jim Beatty, or Beatty. Which tennis tournament was the first to introduce a tiebreaker? The US Open, French Open, or Wimbledon? The US Open. Who was the first woman to win an Olympic gold in judo? Ryoko Tamura, Loma Griva, or Diora Keldiyorova? Diora Keldiyorova. Which pediatrician published the Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care in 1946? Bach, Karp, or Brazelton? Bach. Which 1939 song by Billie Holiday was about racial violence in America? Strange Fruit, God Bless America, or Summertime? Strange Fruit. Which company introduced the world's first home videocassette recorder? Philips, JVC, or Sony? Sony. Which Irish airport was the first in the world to offer duty-free shopping? The Dublin Airport, Shannon Airport, or the Cork Airport? Shannon Airport. Which 1973 treaty regulates international trade in endangered species? Ramsar, Bonn, or CITES? CITES, CITES. Which of these was the first geosynchronous communications satellite? Telstar, Syncom 2, or Courier 1B? Syncom 2. Which underground comic by Robert Crumb challenged mainstream norms in America? Zap Comics, Mr. Natural Comics, or Fantagraphics? Zap Comics. Which tabletop game was the first mainstream role-playing game? Tunnels and Trolls, Chivalry and Sorcery, or Dungeons and Dragons? Dungeons and Dragons. Which BBC radio service launched in 1967 as a legal pop music network? Radio 1, Radio 2, or Radio 3? Radio 1. Which of these personal computers was first sold via Popular Electronics magazine? Apple I, Altair 8800, or the TRS-80? Altair 8800. Which World War II photographer captured the flag raising on Iwo Jima? Joe Rosenthal, Edward Weston, or Ansel Adams? Joe Rosenthal. The 1967 Coleman Report linked student achievement to what? Teacher quality, socioeconomic status, or school funding? Socioeconomic status. Which pedagogical method was developed in the 1960s and uses self-paced learning modules? DI, PBL, or PSI? PSI. Which Soviet Union vessel was the first nuclear-powered icebreaker? Lenin, Rossiya, or NS Savannah? Lenin. What 1971 publication by Daniel Ellsberg exposed U.S.-Vietnam era secrets? The Saigon Files, the Hanoi Report, or the Pentagon Papers? The Pentagon Papers. What 1972 U.S. law prohibited gender discrimination in federally funded education? Title IX, Title VIII, or Title X? Title IX. Who won the first Booker Prize in 1969? V.S. Naipaul, P.H. Newby, or John Le Carré? P.H. Newby. Which 1936 work by Keynes argued for government deficit spending? Wealth of Nations, Capital, or the General Theory? The General Theory. Which rating system was replaced by the MPAA rating system in 1968? The Hayward system, Star Rank system, or Hayes Code? Hayes Code. Which 1936 sit-down strike got recognition for the UAW? Flint Strike, Homestead Strike, or Pullman Strike? Flint strike? Which 1972 satellite was also called OAO3 and studied ultraviolet emissions? Hubble, IUE, or Copernicus? Copernicus. Which 1978 Anglican decision allowed the ordination of women as priests? The Lambeth Conference, Vatican II, or Synod of Whitby? Lambeth Conference. Which American network was the first to broadcast coast to coast? ABC, NBC, or CBS? NBC. The Farmington mine explosion of 1968 killed how many miners? 83, 65, or 78? '78. Which 1957 typeface was designed by Max Meidinger? Times New Roman, Helvetica, or Futura? Helvetica. Who was the first person to climb Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen? Edmund Hillary, Tenzing Norgay, or Reinhold Messner? Reinhold Messner. Which Australian bird can imitate camera shutters and chainsaws? The lyrebird, cockatoo, or magpie? Lyrebird. Who was the first gymnast to score a perfect 10 at the Olympics in 1976? Nadia Comaneci, Olga Korbut, or Mary Lou Retton? Nadia Comaneci. Who was the first woman to swim the English Channel solo? Gertrude Ederle, Florence Chadwick, or Mary Gloria? Gertrude Ederle. Which UN conference was the first major global summit on human environment? Kyoto Summit, the Stockholm Conference, or the Geneva Conference? The Stockholm Conference. Which 1980 graphic novel by Art Spiegelman is about his father's Holocaust experiences? Mouse, Persepolis, or Watchmen? Mouse, excuse me. Which film established the summer blockbuster model for Hollywood? Close Encounters, Jaws, or Star Wars? Jaws. Which 1973 treaty returned control of the Panama Canal from the U.S. to Panama? The Torrijos-Carter, Hey Bunau Varilla, or the Panamanian Charter? Torrijos-Carter. Which operation led to the capture of Francis Gary Powers? Operation Ajax, Operation Gladio, or U2 Incident? U2 Incident. Who became the first man to bowl a perfect 300 game on national television in 1967? Earl Anthony, Dick Weber, or Jack Biondolillo? Jack Biondolillo. Which of these vessels was the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier commissioned by the U.S. Navy? USS Nautilus, USS Enterprise, or USS Nimitz? USS Enterprise. Which 1968 ocean liner was the last and largest passenger ship built by the U.S.? SS United States, SS America, or Queen Mary II? SS United States. Which 1973 invention is considered the first handheld mobile phone? GH388, Microtac, or Dynatac? Dynatac. Which pizza chain was the first to introduce the option of home delivery? Domino's, Pizza Hut, or Papa John's? Domino's. Which Beatles song was the first to include a mellotron sound? Penny Lane, A Day in the Life, or Strawberry Fields Forever? Strawberry Fields Forever. Who wrote the 1974 book Diet for a Small Planet? Rachel Carson, Michael Pollan, or Frances Moore Lappé? Frances Moore Lappé. Which New York club is considered the birthplace of hip-hop culture? 1520 Community Center, Studio 54, or CBGB's? 1520 Community Center. Which aircraft was the world's first all-metal commercial airliner? Boeing 247, Junkers F-13, or the DC-3? Junkers F-13. Who led the first overland crossing of Antarctica in 1957-1958? Vivian Fuchs, Robert Scott, or Roald Amundsen? Vivian Fuchs. Which 1980s breakfast cereal came with mini Star Wars figurines? Captain Crunch, Lucky Charms, or Kellogg's? Kellogg's. Which 1928 treaty renounced war as national policy for those who signed it? The Four-Power Treaty, Kellogg-Briand Pact, or Locarno Treaties? Kellogg-Briand Pact. Which work by Simone de Beauvoir laid the foundation for modern feminism? Sexual Politics, The Second Wave, or The Second Sex? The Second Sex. Who set the men's long jump world record at 8.90 meters in 1968? Ralph Boston, Bob Beamon, or Jesse Owens? Bob Beamon. Which 1976 film was the first to use Steadicam to smooth handheld shots? Rocky, Marathon Man, or Bound for Glory? Bound for Glory. And our bonus question, the UN convention that addressed the control of persistent organic pollutants was what? Let us know the answer in the comments and, of course, how well you did with our quiz class Einstein Rewards. Thanks for playing, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.